Hard Rock Lunchbox.
Greetings and salutations, and welcome to another Thursday edition, the only edition of the Hard Rock Lunchbox. And of course, if you're watching this on Strangerhood TV on YouTube, welcome everybody to the top 20. It is September 18th, 2025, just past noon o'clock, which is, I guess, really when we're starting this show from now on. So I tried to get here on time, but I didn't. So good night, everybody. All right, so yeah. Good thing there's nothing going on in the world this week, huh? Right? Okay. All right. Well, first of all, there is a brand new episode of the Top 20 out. It's called A Note of Gratitude, and anybody that was at our Amityville Music Hall anybody that was at our Amityville Music Hall show really should check it out, because it's basically a thank you to you all that showed up, but it's also an explanation of or an insight into all the idiosyncrasies, anxieties, and just problems that your host here has whenever he's putting on a show or doing a show, whatever. I was actually just saying recently that I was asked like what shows we have for the rest of the year, and I was like, well, we've got really one. Well, we got two. We got one all the way up, far Connecticut, almost to the point of Rhode Island. And the main reason we're taking it is because we need to sort of re-expand our fan base if we want to kind of keep this band being something other than just sort of a local anomaly. So we're doing that. I don't know. I've got slight confirmation on another show in October. Likely confirmation about a very kind of quick and interesting 2 to 3 song set show in November. If and when those things all get confirmed out, I will let you know. But as of right now, the only local thing we've got is our Christmas party, our end of the year sandbox blast that we do every year, and that's December 12th, and that's going to be fun. And that lineup is all set, so that's good. I got to start making flyers for it and all that other stuff. But anyway, so I recommend the episode, even if you kind of skip around and just get to the good part. You can skip the whole end part because there's a lot of stuff going on in the world that is, I just evolved into politics, like as I usually do, and that's kind of a bummer. But it's just a weird space to be in right now. Like it's even hard for me to figure out like what it is I want to say about anything, because it's just like I am in no danger of being canceled, and honestly I don't really care if I am. Like if I got forced off the air at this point, like I'd find something to do with these 2 hours. It would probably look like some sort of free Patreon or whatever, and I'll just basically do this to whoever wants to watch. I don't know how I would do it live, but I'd figure something out. So I know it can be done. So I'm just not super worried about it. And it's not like I have, any sort of financial stake in it. In fact, the moment I stop doing this, I'll actually make more money since I don't charge for anything that I do. Can't seem to monetize anything. Although, I will say the Hard Rock Lunchbox made about 26 cents last week, so yay for me. But, it's just definitely an interesting climate. Things that I'm, trying to pay attention to, because it's really difficult to sort of... Like, they say a lot about, the Trump presidency. Like, there are things that happen every week that would embroil and almost unravel any other presidency for, 3 to 4 years. But they just move so fast here. And it's because nobody cares enough to really stand up to anything. And the ones that do care enough to stand up don't really have any power. And I think that's a real important kind of consideration. I watch a lot of Heather Cox Richardson, who's a historian. She's a professor, and she tends to be fairly apolitical. She really only brings in politics when politics is a part of the historical reference that she's talking about. But, she's pointing out right now how really the reason things are moving so fast is because the opposition has really no power whatsoever. And what you're seeing is the opposition is standing up in the form of state rights or states' rights and stuff, which is, it's an interesting thing to think about the Constitution. I know I talk about the Constitution, and I alienate a lot of the far right, and especially MAGA, when I talk about the Constitution, because they're not really interested in it. A lot of them haven't read it, or they think it says something that it doesn't, and that's I've been saying for the better part of a decade at this point, like, it's really hard to argue with people that are not interested in actual facts. And this is not, well, you get your news here, you get your news here. I mean, the Constitution is an actual document. Like, you can read it. Yeah, there's stuff left open to interpretation, which is why the Supreme Court has to weigh in on things, but those are the fringes. Those are the gray areas. The basic way, the Constitution works is it's simple. It's really simple. I mean, there's three main articles. There's others, but there's three main articles that define and lay out our branches of government and how they're supposed to function. But there's also parts of it, especially the 10th Amendment, which is really, really important, that balances things out. So basically what you have is the first three articles of the Constitution do the branches of government, right? They do they start with the legislative branch because the founders and the framers thought that was the most important branch, and they're right. It really ought to be. And then they go to the executive and then the judiciary. I'm not saying they were important in that regard, but they did put them in that order. So take from that what you will, and that's interpretive, of course. But they really define out how these balances work, right? Because the whole drive of the Constitution was to sort of shore up what was the Articles of Confederation, which was the governing body of the 13 colonies in the original 13 states. But it was insufficient. So they needed a bigger document. They spent about 4 months working on it, which is not nothing, right? Like, think about it now. Like, how long did you spend in college working on that final paper? Considering college is just over 3 months, you spent less time on that than we did on the Constitution. And these were the smartest, best, boldest thinkers of the time trying to put this out, and they had no chat GPT as far as I'm aware. I don't know for sure because I wasn't there. So it's an important thing to realize that their entire goal with this Constitution, or one of their paramount goals with the Constitution, was to protect against a tyrannical government and a tyrannical branch, right? That's why we have three co-equal branches of government. And they go into stuff like with the legislative branch where they split it in two. And they do that mainly because they wanted the House of Representatives to be representative of the people. That's why they have them. That's why that chamber turns over every 2 years, because they figured within 2 years the common man, as it were, or sentiment on the ground could change. And you need people to be reflective and representative of that. That's why they change every 2 years. The Senate. So basically the House of Representatives is supposed to be like, I want this now. Like, blah, 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 blah. And that's fine. That's great. Now, you can imagine how bad that would be if that were the only branch of government, right? Because if you had the House of Representatives just responsive to what the masses wanted at any given time, now you have mob rules. And that's dangerous, right? We all agree that that's dangerous, right? Except the mob. They seem to love it. But so they're the only ones that are allowed to enact laws about, I think it's like spending or stuff like that. It has to start in the House. A lot of important stuff has to start in the House. And the Senate was defined basically as a break to these things. Like, not a break like I need a break. Break as in put your foot on the brake to just like calm them down. So basically the House of Representatives are the kids and the Senate are the parents. And that's why the Senate does not roll over every 2 years. Yes, a third of it does because it needs to be kind of still representative and reflective. And also, don't forget, the founders never expected that people would be lifetime politicians. And that's an important historical context, because to go to Washington and serve your country, or it wasn't Washington at the time, but to go to Capitol and serve your country generally meant you had to leave your business, your family farm, your family or whatever, and ride a horse to the Capitol and spend your time in the Capitol. It wasn't great, right? And there wasn't really, you had power and influence and stuff, but there wasn't a lot of money, to it. And it was really an inconvenience because your livelihood was basically back where you lived. And that would suffer while you were serving. So they never really envisioned that people would become career politicians. Like these senators that have been in for 50 years, that would blow Ben Franklin's mind, for sure. But regardless, the Senate is supposed to act like a break and be like, no, you can't have cookies until you eat your dinner, right? That's the Senate. And it works really well on paper. The problem is when you have career politicians, you have lobbyists, you have influence, you have money, and all those other things, it becomes a problem. And of course it becomes a problem if the entire, both cameral bodies of the legislature are, kind of like on the same page. I mean, theoretically, that should be fine, but because we're in an age of gerrymandering and no term limits and stuff like that, it can be a little not the way it's supposed to be, and you're seeing a lot of that. But yeah, so we have all these checks and balances based on the federal government, but then the 10th Amendment does this really cool thing where it just basically says, like, anything not afforded to the federal government relies on the states to decide. And that's where you hear a lot of arguments, especially from the right. And you've heard it for decades, right? States' rights, states' rights. The whole argument for overturning Roe v. Wade was that it wasn't a federal decision to be made. It's not like the Supreme Court came out and said abortion's illegal. That's not what they said. They simply overturned the ruling that said that it was a federal protection. And this Supreme Court, as radical as it is, and again, I'm defining radical by a court that would upend years, decades of stare decisis, which is basically precedent. Like, that is radical. That is the definition of a radical court. So anytime anybody ever tells you this is not a radical court, by definition, it is. And you can agree with them or not agree with them, but it is by definition a radical court because they overturned their own ruling, right? They're not supposed to do that. And I could talk more about the Supreme Court and our perceptions of it in our lifetime. Anybody that's Gen X and later has a very different perception of what the Supreme Court is supposed to be. And what you're seeing now, while it's way more reactive and way more conservative, is closer to the average that it's been. Ask anybody that was affected by Plessy versus Ferguson when they decided that it was okay for black people to be kept separate but equal, which never really worked out anyway. I digress. So getting back to the 10th Amendment, the reason that that's important and the reason the right wanted it is when they overturned Roe v. Wade, they said it wasn't a federal protection, so it falls to the states by default. If something isn't a federal protection, it defaults to the states to make up their own minds. And they love this because the states that they live in, especially the red states, immediately had all these, I forget what they were called, but they're basically like knee-jerk laws on the books that as soon as abortion wasn't federally protected, these rules, these anti-abortion measures would go into effect, and that's exactly what happened. But the states love that. But what you're seeing right now in the case of these vaccine mandates, right? So this vaccine stuff is really important because if you're following it at all, and you live in New York or any of the states like in the West Coast Alliance, which California, Oregon, and Washington, and now Hawaii just formed. It's a West Coast Health Alliance, right? Like WCHA or whatever. And basically what they did is they got together and they were like, we don't care what the federal government says. You can't mandate this as a federal law. And so we're going to have our own alliance. We're going to have our own health experts. We're going to have our own, decisions on medication, pharmaceuticals, and of course vaccines. And for those of you living in New York, the reason this matters is because of what just went down this past week. So Bobby Kennedy, who is absolutely destroying national health, by the way. And if you don't believe me, message me, because we can go through this ad nauseum. The people that think that Bobby Kennedy is a hero because he got red number 2 out of food, you need better heroes, right? That is not nothing. That shouldn't even be a consideration. You shouldn't have any of those things in food. If we just adopted the European model, the European Union model on food, everybody in America would be healthier within a year. That's not even up for debate. Kennedy himself has said very close to the same thing. So anybody that thinks he's a savior is absolutely wrong. And you can ask any number of the hundreds of thousands of people that were involved in cancer research that just had all their funding cut because Kennedy doesn't believe in it. And even all the pulling of the mRNA vaccines, which definitely got a bad rap during COVID, but was the main, one of the main things that they were studying in stuff like Alzheimer's and cancer and a lot of other things that were going on, and they just pulled all the funding. So not only are we not studying that anymore, all the studies that we had stopped. So we don't know. We're not going to be any further along in terms of health progress until Kennedy is removed from office, which I hope really will be soon. But anyway, so he fired at the CDC. Bobby Kennedy fired the entire panel of vaccine experts, including the head of the CDC, who testified before Congress yesterday and the reason she says she was fired, and I definitely believe her over anything Kennedy says, because he's been busted in lies in Congress, which was, I thought was funny a couple weeks ago when he was testifying before Congress, and the douche Republican that was in charge of the committee said he didn't have to be under oath, giving him free rein to lie, and he did, because people were fact-checking stuff that he was saying, and not even fact-checking against facts, fact-checking stuff where he's like, I never said that, and then they had, video of him saying that. Like, it's just, it's bananas the extent to which these people will lie, because they don't care. So anyway, so he fired the head of the CDC, basically because he came to her and was like, I need you to pre-approve all these, advices that my new panel is going to give you. And she's like, I can't do that. Like, I can't pre-approve. Like, I need to see what their advice is and then run it, check against science. And, he was like, no. And she was like, well, if you don't trust me to do that, then I guess you just don't trust me to do that. And he fired her the next day. So anyway, so that's what happened. Plus, he fired the entire vaccine panel of experts that decide on our federal guidelines. These are not rules. These are guidelines and recommendations about vaccines, and then installed his own. He just installed his own experts. And these are all vaccine skeptics and vaccine deniers and stuff like that. So the federal conventional guideline right now is that only, and I'm going to deal with COVID specifically because I have a point to make on this, only people that meet a few certain requirements, and it's usually some sort of immuno or health compromised status or super old and even maybe super young, like 2 and under, can get the COVID vaccine with a prescription, right? Like that's basically what they said, which means that around the country, if states don't step in, around the country, even if you wanted a COVID vaccine, you can't get one. Because you're not allowed to get it without a prescription, according to the federal government, and doctors aren't allowed to write you those prescriptions unless you fall into these categories, right? So you couldn't get it even if you wanted to. So what the West Coast Health Alliance and what New York State just did is Kathy Hochul, who I am not a big fan of in general, just did the right thing, and she signed an executive order that said, yeah, you can get a COVID vaccine at any pharmacy at any time with or without a prescription. It's not a mandate. You don't have to get your vaccine, but it allows you to do it, right? What she can't do, unfortunately, is force the insurance companies to pay for it. So that's an ongoing fight right now, and it probably is going to end up that New York State is going to end up having to pay for it, which means that you and I, as New York State residents, are going to have to pay for it. Now, for me, I'm okay with that. I'm a big believer in social programs, especially social health emergencies. My kids are out all the time. I do not want them to get COVID and die. They won't, because they're healthy and they know how to fight this kind of thing. I myself am not in the mood to get a COVID vaccine or a booster or anything like that. That is a choice I'm making, but it's a choice that I am making. And the reason I bring this up is because the number one pushback that you hear from people during the COVID era is as follows. They are mad. They are mad like petulant children that they were, quote unquote, forced to get vaccines, the COVID vaccine. Let's be quite clear. They were not forced to do anything. The only people that were actually forced to do it were people already enlisted in the armed services of our country, because you can't get out of that agreement or contract if you, because you don't want to get a shot. Now, I don't know what you know about the armed services, but as soon as you go overseas, you get a whole host of vaccinations because they don't care what you want. If you're going over to Africa to be a peacekeeper, say in Sudan, you're getting a malaria shot, whether you want it or not, because it's endemic to that area of the world, right? That's just what happens. Those people were not given a choice. So if you want to make an argument about that, that's fine. Everybody else is like, I wasn't given a choice, I was forced to do this. But if you make them say that sentence completely, I was forced to do that to keep my public job if I wanted it. So yeah, is it unfair that, police officers, firefighters, public school teachers, and federal officials had to have this COVID vaccine if they wanted to continue working and front-facing the public? You can make an argument that's unfair, but you weren't forced to do it. You were completely allowed to resign your job, and a lot of people did. That's a difference. That is an actual difference between rounding people up and forcing them to get their vaccines. You could always get another job. I know it's difficult. I know it's a form of coercion, and I know it's unfair. But it was the case. You did not have to get the vaccine. You just couldn't work in that job. And that makes sense to me. It sucks, but it makes sense to me. What these same people are doing now is the same thing, just from an opposite lens. They're telling you, an autonomous human being, an American citizen, that says if you want to get the COVID vaccine, you can't. You're not allowed to. They are forcing you to not get it. They are completely removing that option from you. So in this era where people are constantly talking about their personal freedom, and believe me, I see it all the time, you can tell them they can just shut the F up, because they are absolutely so full of it. And they are so full of what they believe that their team is right, because it was such an affront to them that they had to take a vaccine, that they are now not letting you get one if you wanted to. Think about that for a second. And put that in any other context, right? I want to get a driver's license. You can't. Why not? Because we don't want you to have one. You want to fly in this plane to go visit somebody. You can't. Why? Because we don't want to let you. Right? These are mild examples, but we're talking about your actual health here. And it's the denial that people died somehow from COVID, even though we all know them. Like, we all know people that died from COVID, right? Not necessarily your personal family, but like other people. We know people in their extended families. We all do. Everybody listening to me right now knows somebody that was affected by COVID. We all do. Some family that was affected by COVID. And what you're saying, what these people on the right, and MAGA and MAHA especially, are saying, like, even if you're super worried about it, say you work in public transportation, say you work in Penn Station, so you're facing, hundreds of thousands of people, international people all day long, or JFK or a TSA employee, say you're doing that. You're not even allowed to get this vaccine if you really think you want it. Let's say you're immune compromised. Let's say you're pulmonarily compromised. Let's say you have a heart condition. Now, there's a line to what is qualifiable as that, but let's say you smoke 2 packs a day and you know your lung capacity isn't good, but your doctor doesn't think so. Now you can't get a COVID shot, even though you know it's a risk. This is something that you get to choose. So it's super important that our state and a lot of other states are doing this. And I want everybody to realize what this battle is, because even though the federal government is lost, at least until 26, I hope to God, and I'm not endorsing any particular candidate or any particular party. What I would like to see is some balance back in the federal government. Because what's happening now, and I don't even want to get into the nonsense that J.D. Vance is spewing. And if you missed it, what he was saying about going after all these colleges, and now that, going after all these, broadcast companies, because if you weren't paying attention, Jimmy Kimmel just got put on hiatus because they didn't like what he said about Charlie Kirk, which is ridiculous, honestly. He's at worst he was pointing out hypocrisies and stuff, but he didn't have a bad thing to say about what was going on in the country. But these people are just forcing their will on people. And what I was going to say about J.D. Vance, he's talking about colleges and how they're trying to withhold all this federal funding, and actually withholding all this federal funding to colleges like Columbia and Harvard and just all these places that they've really gone after. And he said out of his mouth, it's time for us to deinstitutionalize the left and reinstitutionalize the right, because he's trying to force everybody into his ideology. And this dude, this is exactly what Orban has done in Hungary. This is what Hitler was doing in pre-Nazi Germany. It's absolutely what Putin does. This is what authoritarian governments do. And he said it out loud. He said it to us. This is what he wants to do. He wants to deinstitutionalize the left. He wants to get rid of the left. He wants to make us separate but equal, to use a Plessy versus Ferguson thing. And this is really goddamn dangerous. So even though I believe that the federal government is lost for the next whatever months, 18 months or whatever it is, and hopefully there's a swing in 2026, I don't know. I really don't know if there's going to be. I hope there's a bigger swing in 2028, because in my heart of hearts, what I really want is a big giant wave of responsible governance that is going to go after these people like Pam Bondi and Kash Patel and anybody else in the executive branch that have actually been violating the Constitution in furtherance of their job. There are people like Senator Blumenthal that called out Kash Patel just the other day. He told him, you lied to my face when you said you weren't going to go after political enemies of the president, because it's exactly what he's been doing. A sitting senator told the head of the FBI that he lied to his face in his confirmation hearing. That, my friends, is grounds for impeachment right there, because you lied to Congress. You lied to a direct committee of Congress, and that is a violation. It is illegal to do that, and Kash Patel can be removed for that, and I hope he is. I really do. But because the federal government is basically lost in the wilderness for whatever period of time coming up, the battle really becomes at the states, where we have more control, where we have representative democracy. We do not have the electoral college in states. We have people that we can vote in to fight against this. There was some special election, I cannot remember if it was like Ohio or Virginia or whatever, that elected a Democrat that finally broke the Republican supermajority in those states. Supermajority means they can pass whatever they want. They can't do that anymore. It's simple and subtle, but that is how this kind of stuff is going to happen. So please, please, please be paying attention to what's going on in your states. And while I argue that most of us have slept on what's going on in the federal government for years, despite people like me telling you, despite people much smarter than me telling you it was happening, this is really your last line of defense. You need to protect your state's autonomy. You need to make sure your state is doing things that you want it to do. And for all of you MAGA people in New York that think it's a problem, nobody is forcing you to get a vaccine. In fact, people like me don't want you to ever get another vaccine in your life again. As far as I'm concerned, there's too many people on the Long Island Expressway. The sooner we start culling this herd a little bit, the better for me personally. But realize that when you are telling people what they can't do, you are just as bad as the thing that you protest against so much. And that makes you a hypocrite, which makes you worse. So I've talked enough. Isn't that always the way? Talked enough. I'm sure all these clips will get so many positive comments on TikTok where brains go to die. But that's fine, because again, the more people, the less people we have, the better it's going to be for me. I might even get to practice in under an hour, so I'm super happy about that. We've got to show up in Connecticut next week. If we could clear out the Northeast quarter by then with a good pandemic, I'm kind of down for that as well, but it's neither here nor there. It's time for some music as we start, like as we always do, with a bunch of local bands that I think are just completely underrepresented, so I'm going to represent them here. And why not start with a little Neon Skyline? Why, you ask? Because that's the song I picked. That's about as much thought went into it.